IRS dealings, as well as the Forvis audit. I expect a few of y'all are here tonight because you want to be in on that. So we're going to have some reporting on that, and then time for Q&A. We want everyone to have the opportunity to have their voice heard. So, but before we get to the business meeting led by Brandon Halsey, we're going to take a time of prayer, and we're also going to pray for international missions. During the month of December, we're taking an offering for international missions that goes to both Lottie Moon as well as CBF Global Missions, and we're continuing to highlight stories as to what those dollars go towards. So, even as you consider your generosity toward the church at year's end, you might consider also giving a special gift to help the gospel to spread around the world. So Seth, are we ready for that video? Let's give our attention to that.
Your books.
Well, it's not going to work. All right. Is there a toddler in the room to help us with the technology tonight? Anybody able to pitch in? I'm just kidding. Well, Seth, thank you for giving it a try, buddy. I appreciate that. So we will, what we can do is we can upload these videos to Facebook for the future, let you take a look at that, and grateful for the encouragement of our Women on Mission, helping us to think about international missions. So let's think about our prayer list this evening. We've had a few people that have had a couple of procedures, but to our knowledge, nobody is in the hospital right now. Jane Irwin did have surgery on Monday that she had been waiting for a long time. It was successful, and she is at home. So we are very grateful for that. Also, I think most people, or some people know by now, that Gary Lethko had his pacemaker worked on. I believe it was replaced on Monday. And just so grateful for the miracle that's come to his life when he got a new heart many years ago, and now that kind of ongoing work that he's having done. But we are just thankful for Gary. And thank you, Terry. He's doing okay? Okay, good. Okay. We're thankful for that. There's quite a few people that we're praying for. As you can take a look at our prayer list, we do want to highlight about the death of Bob Browder's sister, Becky Johnson. So can we remember the Browder family tonight? Also the Chambers family and the death of Debbie Chambers, and some that we've continued to pray for over the last couple of weeks. We're praying for those who are hurting, especially during the holiday season. We want to remember Sally Keaton tonight, who's been battling a very severe depression for some time now. Russ and Jan Driver, who have had COVID, as well as a fall for Russ, and they're doing fine, but they're not able to come to worship right now. They're sort of playing it a little bit safe relative to their immune systems being compromised. So we want to pray for the Drivers. Bob Dickey's father is continuing to do well after some heart issues about a month ago, and quite a few others. Susan Rainey has begun with cancer treatment, and we continue to pray for Rose Austin, Lois Rice, who's recovering at home after some time at Life Care, and Joyce Buckner, who is still at NHC Farragut. Are there others that you'd like for us to remember in prayer this evening? Okay, Bob. Let's get the microphone around so we can have our Facebook participants be able to hear.
Brent, Steve, and Debbie Jordan have been regular attenders for a little over a year in our Sunday school class and also in the 11 o'clock worship service. Steve found out this morning that he's got stomach cancer.
Okay.
And that's bad enough, but the timing is bad. His retirement date is next Friday, the 22nd, and they're planning to move back to their permanent home just outside Atlanta. So they really would appreciate our prayers.
Yes. Oh, so sad to hear that. Thank you for letting us know. And let's remember Steve Jordan tonight and their family. Okay, we got right over here. Thank you.
have a coworker at VMC's ex-husband committed suicide last week. Her name is Megan.
Megan, okay. What a tragedy. Thanks for letting us know. Others we can pray for tonight, just raise your hand. We'll get the microphone over to you. It could be a neighbor, a friend. It could be a personal prayer request that you have.
Okay, my mom, Kathleen, we all were praying for her last week because the stroke and TI or whatever, but this morning we got a call that she has COVID. So she's 100. Please pray for her.
We will.
And that she'll recover from this.
Okay, we will, Pam. Thank you. Just raise your hand if you'd like to voice a prayer request tonight. Do you have any praises in the room tonight? Anything in particular that you can give God thanks for? So we got over here. So Michelle first, and then Michelle Lamond over there in the back. Yeah. And then, if you have a prayer request, just raise your hand, let me know. Or a praise tonight.
Just to continue praying for my back to get better.
We will, yeah. And you had a treatment today and feeling a little better today, so we give God praise for that. Yeah, any word of praise or a word of prayer this evening? Pam has a praise. Pam Neal has a praise.
I do.
Yes.
You prayed for my granddaughter last week. She was in ICU for 5 days with COVID and pneumonia, and it was looking pretty grim, and she came out of ICU Sunday night and is turning around. She's got a long way to go, but she is our Christmas miracle. And my daughter-in-law and son said, please thank all the people that prayed for her.
We will. All right. Amen.
That's
Thank
a
you,
big
Pam.
praise.
Yeah, that's a great praise, yeah. So good. Yeah. I think one word of praise, wasn't it beautiful on Sunday, the children that led us in worship? So good. And our children's choir teachers that have given a lot of time to help make that moment happen. And then for Georgia Miller to accept Christ, and we're looking forward to the baptism soon. So we give God praise for that. Anything else you want to mention tonight, prayer or praise? Okay, let's go to God in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the joy of Christmas, the peace that comes, Lord, when we take time to consider all that you've done and what it means, Lord, that you came into the world as a tiny baby, willing to take on flesh and to suffer alongside us. We're grateful, God, for your presence, because we know that in you coming as Emmanuel, that it was that signal that you were with us. And so we thank you tonight that you've been already present in this room, and God, you have inhabited our praises. You've heard our prayers. You know those who hurt and those who grieve. You know those, Lord, who need an extra measure of grace tonight. For the good words that we've heard this evening, we give you thanks. And God, we thank you even for the hard times that people are going through, because we know that through those, Lord, you can do something and you can draw people close to your heart. So we do pray, Lord, that in all this, that we might give gratitude, no matter what we might be experiencing. We're thankful for Jesus, and his is the name above every name. He makes all the difference, and we're gathered in that name tonight. We thank you for the cross, for the forgiveness of sins through his blood, through the sanctification that comes through the Holy Spirit, the everlasting life that awaits us one day, and the abundant life that he gives us now. God, would you bless our fellowship tonight with your peace, and help us, Lord, as we seek to hear from one another and to learn together, Lord, how we can continue to get better as a fellowship. And in all these ways, we acknowledge that this is your church. And your word says, God, that you will build the church. We give you thanks for that. And God, we thank you for the promise that as you build your church, that the very gates of hell cannot overcome it. We praise you, God, for the work of the church in this past year and the work that is ahead. It's all dedicated to you, and we pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So I'm going to call on Megan in a moment, who's signaling to me something. Oh, do you have a video you want to show? Okay. Yeah, let's check out this Global Missions video. Brandon, if you could just wait for 1 minute. I think we're ready to go. And yeah, roll that footage. All right, thank you, Seth. So that was a highlight of the CBF Global Missions offering, and again, the opportunity to give during the month of December. There are some, we have by the doors and also at the Welcome Center some little folders that describe the work of CBF as well as the Lottie Moon SBC offering, and there are ways that you can connect and give in the pews. So thank you again for giving generously. All right, so let's kick it into our business meeting for tonight. I'm going to call Brandon Halsey, who is the chair of our church council. And according to our bylaws, she's the one that also therefore officiates any kind of business session that we have if she is able to be present. And grateful for Brandon's leadership. So thanks.
Thank you. Good evening. How's everybody doing? Good. So I will call this meeting to order. And the first thing on the list is prayer list and prayer, but we already did that. So let's skip to the next one. And it's the minutes. If you'll see in your packet, the minutes from the September 13th business meeting are in there. Hopefully maybe some of you had a chance to skim over it really quickly. Is there a motion to accept the minutes? Who said that? Thank you. Tyler Whetstone. Do I have a second? Joe Chandler. Okay. All those in favor of accepting the minutes, say aye. Any opposed? Fantastic. Okay. Next is the clerk's report. Bill Higdon, where are you? Do you have anything to say, or you just want to submit the report as is? Okay. Okay, so in the packet, right behind the minutes from September is the clerk's report from this last quarter of the year. You'll see births, deaths, and additions, including by baptism in there. So we've had a lot of people join the church lately. That's exciting. And then there's the deacon ministry team's quarterly reports at the bottom as well. Does that have to be approved, or it's just submitted? Okay. Any questions about the clerk's report? Great. Okay, next is the treasurer's report. So that is Bob Calloway. There you are.
Thank you, Brandon. The financial summary is on the last page of your handout, and I'm going to summarize the summary. We had our best giving month of the fiscal year in November with $155,000. Now, I hate to follow that statement with this one, but we had our highest expense month of the fiscal year by far, with expenses of $198,000, giving us a monthly deficit of $42,000. And that brought our year-to-date deficit to $267,000. The two major areas where expenses went really high were in the administrative area and building and grounds. Personnel was the lowest it's been for the fiscal year. The total balance of all our funds at the Tennessee Baptist Foundation, which is on there, is $3,646,000, which is almost the highest it's been all year. It misses the highest by $11,000. So those funds are doing well. And I will close just by saying that so far this month, our giving exceeds $120,000. Now, I don't want to jinx it by saying anything else, but that's a good start. Any questions about the finances? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is the church council report. I unfortunately was not at the last church council meeting because I was at a 5th grade musical. And thankfully, Steve filled in and did a great job, but from what I hear, it was a pretty short meeting. There wasn't a lot of big news, aside from the things that we're gonna go ahead and talk about the rest of the meeting. So I'm gonna not submit a formal report and just let you hear from all the other speakers about all the other things we're gonna talk about. So then we'll move on to the WOM report. If you'll see in the back of your packet, there are 2 pages, one from the 3rd quarter and one from the 4th quarter, submitted by Charlotte Damewood on what's going on with Women on Mission, so Mission Friends, Girls in Actions, and RA reports. You can read those. Any questions or anybody that would like to add or say anything about any of that? I will go back to that, yes. Any questions on WOM? Okay. Steve did remind me, and I meant to say this, back to the church council report. The monthly meeting notes from the church council meetings are being submitted to Seth, who's putting a QR code in the bulletin. So every month you can read those notes from every one of our meetings. So if you're interested, you can go back and look at our meeting minutes from November. Okay, now we're getting to the juicy stuff, the Finance Committee report. So first will be Jim Decker to talk about the Forvis report.
I'm going to ask Steve Foster to come up here with me, because really this may be sort of a tag team report between the two of us. I've got the privilege this year of serving as the chairman of the Finance Committee, and it is also hopefully my pleasure to be able to report the conclusion of an endeavor that's been going on now for well over a year. Okay, so I'll give you a little bit of background, and but before I do that, let me just say this. I want to thank and commend our church staff, first of all, and that includes Pam, more recently Steve, and everyone who's been part of a process, and I'll use that word sort of as a general term, for the last year and a half. But also I want to commend and thank all the members of last year's Finance Committee and this year's Finance Committee, because really this bridged over between 2 different years. So if you're here tonight and you served on the Finance Committee last year, would you raise your hand? All right, so thank you, and I see several out there. And if you're currently serving on the Finance Committee this year, raise your hand. We've got several here as well. Really a big thank you should go to Rick Carringer. I don't see Rick here tonight. He was chairman of the Finance Committee last year.
Can you give a little background why we're doing this?
Yes, I'll get there. Yeah, I'm getting there. Yeah. Literally, the first day of our fiscal year last year, or really the first week of our fiscal year last year in July, as Rick was coming in as chairman of the Finance Committee, we received notice from the IRS that we were delinquent in paying payroll taxes for a period of time. That was something that we were unaware of, something that was new to us, and again, to Rick's credit, he was both confronted with that, but also put in motion a response to see what was going on. So that really triggered several different things, one of which Steve will report on and give you a much more detailed timeline as to what we did on behalf of the church to respond to the IRS. And quite frankly, that continues even today. But also, the Finance Committee, you know, once we became aware of this, again, I'm going back to July of 2022. Once we became aware of it, obviously we were concerned about how this could have happened, why it happened, what was, what types of things were or were not done to prompt this type of thing. If you've ever got a letter from the IRS or a call from the IRS, that's a pretty big deal, right? And so that's the way we felt as a church. So really, the first couple of months, maybe 2 or 3 months of last year, July, August, September of last year, the Finance Committee really wrangled with how do we deal with this, okay? And there were 2 fundamental things that occurred. One is we retained an attorney. Steve can talk about that here in a moment, to represent us in our communication with the IRS. The other thing that we did was that we felt that it was prudent on the part of the church to engage the services of what I'm going to call a forensic auditor, okay? Now, the term forensic, if you're familiar with that term, means basically we want to make sure that there was no wrongdoing, any criminal activity or anything such as that may have bearing on why the IRS, were coming to us. So I don't know if we have the PowerPoint back there. I'm going to paraphrase for you a report that we received just a few weeks ago from a company by the name of Forvis. Okay, you can see their logo at the background, at the bottom. Forvis actually is a forensic auditor, and this is the work that they do. They look at financial information retrospectively by looking through a lot of different documents, a lot of different records, to hopefully determine whether or not there had been some type of inappropriate activity. So, Forvis has started working with us back in October. As I mentioned earlier, we heard from the IRS in July, so we evaluated our options in probably August and September, and by October, we had selected and identified Forvis to work in our behalf to conduct basically an independent audit, but more specifically to look and make sure that there was not any inappropriate activity. So Forvis, as you can see there, began their work back at that time. And to say that they had to look through a lot of documents is an understatement. You can see here that we were having to pull together a lot of different documents from various bank accounts that the church had open during those times. Had to sort of pull together a sequence of events as to what happened and what may have happened or not happened, specifically as it relates to the IRS concerns and issues. And Forvis began their work. They did much of it behind the scenes, okay? Again, that's the independence of what they were asked to do, but obviously relied on our church staff, and particularly at that time, Pam was very helpful in terms of gathering information and providing it for them. So they began their analysis once they began gathering such information. Next slide, please. So what information was provided? It's probably no secret to you the church has a lot of different accounts, okay, for various both operating and designated purposes. So I had to look at each and every one of those bank accounts over a period of time. That consisted of over 17,000 transactions. If you can think how long it takes to look at 17,000 transactions, financial transactions, that's a lot of time. Looked at all of our canceled checks for a period of time, primarily dating back to 2012. Okay, now why did we go back that far? Because that's really the time frame in which the IRS began, bringing to our attention that there were some lapses in terms of our paying payroll taxes. So we felt we needed to go back a sufficient period of time to make sure we can put together a trail of information and bring it all up to date. As I mentioned earlier, we have some primary operating accounts. We also have some designated accounts, and I'm not going to bore you with all the detail of each of those, but nevertheless, a lot of information had to be sifted through, and that's the work that Forvis did for us, sort of in the background. Also looked at any type of payroll tax issues that may have come out of that review as well. Next slide. And this is where it really gets sort of in more detail than I think you really care to hear about, but this is something that Forvis did for us, and go back and basically mapped out each bank account, okay, and the transactions that occurred during that period of time that I just mentioned, going back to 2012. And actually, I think there's a subsequent slide. The next slide is a continuation of that really demonstrates the work that they did on our behalf. Again, just think about scrubbing through all the financial transactions that occurred within our congregation over the last 10, now 11 years, going back to 2012. So that obviously took a lot of time. I'll just be very honest with you. On the part of the finance committee, we're starting to get a little frustrated. Why is it taking so much time? Even though they were giving us periodic reports, really wasn't much in terms of feedback we were getting, other than they're still compiling their work and putting together all of their information. It also, next slide, it came to a point where they had to have some conversations with our banking partners, Okay, can we bring that next slide? Here we go. Okay, Truist Bank, as you know, came about during this period of time, really as a result of the merger between SunTrust and BB&T. Many of our primary accounts were with SunTrust. So in the midst of all this, obviously, we had to deal with the fact that the bank themselves were dealing with merged information, and so that sort of created another, minor obstacle. But in the case of, in the context of doing this work, four of us also had to have direct conversations with our banking partner, okay, in addition to the information that we were given to them. Okay, so that led to having to get to some more detailed information because, it's one thing to look at canceled checks. If you're like me, you still write a lot of checks. I'm probably one of the few people that still does a lot of that, but you write a lot of checks. But a lot of things are done electronically now in the banking world, either through ACHs or automatic transactions that don't require a written check. So that meant that four of us had to talk directly with the bank and start looking at each of those transactions as well. That took a lot of time. And as you can see here, those requests added an additional 200 statements and in addition to the check images that they were able to obtain through other sources. Now, let me tell you this. I'm going to stop right here. It's not said in this report, but Truist Bank was really very helpful in this whole process. Okay, they could have stonewalled it a little bit and saying, well, that's not our problem. But let me tell you, they really stepped up to the plate, and actually they provided a lot of information to four of us at no charge to us. In the typical world, in the business world, there would have been a fee for every one of those pieces of information that they had to provide. But I just want to brag a little bit on Truist that really stepped up to plate and worked in our behalf because they wanted this issue resolved as well. Okay, so it's not noted in this report, but I can tell you they were very helpful in the whole process. So next slide, what's the process you go through when you conduct a forensic audit, okay? It's something called a horizontal analysis. That means they looked horizontally over the time frame, going back to 2012 to 2022 and into 23. Okay, so that's what's meant by the horizontal analysis of financial statements. Looked at bank statements, looked at the financial reports that we compiled and our staff compiled. And so they created a database, okay, by which they could use to sift through and make sure that what was being recorded actually matched up with what was being reported. Looked at checked images, looked at vendor analysis. Anytime we wrote a check to an outside vendor, any type of manual transaction, any type of things that were authorized by the committee or were not authorized by the committee, finance committee. So all of that was important and came into being. Looked at any checks greater than $1,000. Obviously, that would be sort of a trigger point that would raise a concern. And then if you're familiar with a statistical analysis of data, they did a standard deviation testing because it's really impossible to take all of that information and get into the granular detail you need to conduct a process like this. So they use what's standardly accepted practices in terms of sampling of information and was able to then come back with us with a final report. Obviously, that included looking at any of our payroll issues because that was the trigger point with the IRS that raised the concern in the first place. So next slide just kind of gets to the finality of it, okay? What were their conclusions? Okay, after analyzing bank information for that period that I mentioned, 2012 to 2022, the second bullet point is really the important thing for you to take away. They've not identified any inappropriate disbursements. So that's the part that really sort of gave the committee some feeling that really there was no wrongdoing. Okay, because you go into a process like this, you want to be open-minded, you want to be independent, you want to be transparent, and you want to make sure that the analysis is conducted according to the appropriate ways in which auditors do that. And if there was any impropriety, then obviously we wanted to know that on the part of the church staff. So the good news is they didn't find anything. I mean, in very, very East Tennessee terms, they didn't find any wrongdoing. Okay, that's the good news. What they did find were sort of some practices that probably didn't really fit what should have been acceptable types of practices, two of which are on the slide. There was an example where our financial clerk actually went to the bank and withdrew some cash, pretty significant amount of cash, as a matter of fact, $8,900 in one case and $2,300 in another. So that really, you can imagine, triggered a concern. Why would she go and take that amount of cash out? But then we found the transaction where she used that cash to pay off a credit card. Okay? We believe it was because it was getting towards the end of the month and she felt like it needed to be done and closed before. Actually, it was the end of the fiscal year, wasn't it? So that's why we felt like we think that was done. That's probably not the way it should have been done, okay? But the reality of it is there was no indication of any wrongdoing. It was used for a legitimate purpose, okay? And so when we found out that sort of gave us a sense of relief, because really, when you look at that amount of money, you think, well, what's going on here? And in this case, there was an explanation. So when there was an explanation, that kind of made us feel better about that. Next steps is the next slide. I think that's probably the last slide. Really what they told us, which we probably already knew, was we really needed to tighten up our practices a little bit better. There was some thing, I'll use the word sloppy bookkeeping. That's probably not the right term. That's not an appropriate accounting term. But nevertheless, there's probably some things that were just done that probably could have been done better. Let me just say it that way. That actually was a conclusion that the Finance Committee came to over a year ago, okay, as we started looking at this. So somewhere at your seat, we passed out a document that looks like this called Financial Policies and Procedures. And really, again, let me commend Rick Herringer as chairman last year for really leading this process. We went through every one of our financial policies and procedures that our Finance Committee felt were important for First Baptist Church. And we started this process really fairly quickly as we got into both looking at the IRS issue and doing the Forvis review. Now, it took a little longer than we wanted to because we had our hands full with other things. So every meeting we had on the agenda to continue looking at this document, but quite often we had to delay that till the next month because we had other things that were really more important. But this is a result of literally a year-long work because of what really came to bear or came to our attention as part of this whole process. So the good news is I feel very confident now, and we've got some, let me tell you, this Finance Committee we have this year is very strong, okay? People like Beth Brazil, who's here, people like Rick Herringer, and Bob Calloway is our treasurer, Clark Denton, people who really are very well-minded people, very educated in terms of finance, and I'm just feeling very fortunate to be chairman because I feel a little intimidated because of the knowledge base in the room, and they're really good people. But last year's committee and this year's committee, I think, are to be commended for pulling together this document that I think will serve us well into the future. Okay, so that's sort of just a side project that we had going on in addition to dealing with the information from Forvis, having interaction with them, and dealing with IRS, which Steve will talk about here in just a moment. So when you see the last slide there where they suggest establishing internal controls, that's in essence is what you see here in this document, and we've tightened that up significantly. Now let me comment on a couple of other things and I'll open it up for questions. Also, what we did last year, okay, we outsourced our accounting to an independent auditor, not Forvis, but another independent auditor, basically as a prudent measure to make sure that before we get to the finality of this project, we wanted to make sure everything was being done in accordance to accepted accounting practices. So we did that and have been outsourcing that really over the course of about the last year or so. Just recently, though, just to make you aware of this, and I guess beginning in January, we'll be pulling a lot of that back internally. We have a financial assistant now that his name is Jim Daniels. We have a lot of confidence in, and he feels confident in his abilities to be able to pull a lot of that back in. What we're not going to pull back in, however, is payroll. Okay, so the independent auditor that we've been using for our accounting will continue to do our payroll. Once again, we think that's a prudent thing to do because really it was payroll issues that prompted this whole thing in the first place. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything to the book, okay? And so when does that start? Starts in January? Or?
Actually, it'd be February.
In February, okay, end of January, moving into February, I'm sorry. So, again, another example of what the Finance Committee felt was important to do and really being prudent with respect to how the finances of our church are being handled. So, I've given you a lot of information, I've used a lot of words, I've actually paraphrased the presentation that Forvis did for us. I was hoping they could be here to do it themselves, but they couldn't work it into their schedule. So I've paraphrased what they gave to us, but I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Yeah, George?
So what you're saying here is if the guidelines that you came up with now had been followed by the person in charge, we would be having this problem. Is that what we're saying here?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say retrospectively what would have happened or could have happened in the past. We just feel like going forward, if we follow these policies and practices that we put together, that would certainly could have mitigated the issue that we are dealing with, but we feel that it will help to not have that issue come about again in the future.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm coming.
We do have a church employee, Jim Daniels,
You want to say your question so they can hear you?
You know, basically.
I was just asking if Jim Daniels is going to be a church
Well,
employee.
he already is a church
okay.
employee, and he's been with us now for several months. Yeah,
I hired him.
yeah. Other questions? And by the way, he's doing a great job. And he comes to our Finance Committee meetings and is there to help respond to any questions that we may have.
Over here. I thought I saw a hand.
Jim, will you speak to audit, internal, external audit?
Okay. let's talk about internal audit. Internal auditing procedures are something that most organizations will do, and it follows practices like I've just described here, okay? And in our case, the overseer of that internal audit is the finance committee. The finance committee that's voted on by the church, appointed by the church, really serves in that fiduciary responsibility of overseeing what happens and make sure that we follow the policies that we've established for ourselves. And so the internal audit is done basically every month when we have a finance committee. We have bank statements that we review. We review every transaction of every bank statement. We have financial statements that have been prepared for us. Up until now, they've been prepared by the outside auditor that I just described to you. Okay, so that's the internal auditing function, okay? When you speak to, excuse me, to external auditing, that's where you engage the services of an external auditing firm that'll come in and do an audit for you. Most organizations that I've worked for in my career, we've had an external auditor that we pay a nice fee to every year to come in and review our information and put together an audit report at the conclusion of your fiscal year. Many organizations do that. What we found is that it's not always the case in the case of a church, that some churches do, but not all churches engage the services of an external audit each and every year to come review our books. I can tell you just from experience, when you do that, you better be prepared to pay a nice fee, because auditors, kind of like lawyers, right? We got some old lawyers in the room. They charge a pretty hefty fee. Historically, First Baptist has not used an external auditor every year to come in and review our books. Okay, and it's always been felt, I guess, both historically, not just this committee or last year or whatever, that that was not really necessary, as long as we had a good set of internal practices and procedures to follow. We've discussed this at the Finance Committee, okay, and really have not come to any conclusion as to whether or not considering that in the future might be something to consider, okay? If we did it, we would have to budget for it, and we're already halfway into this year's budget already, so it's probably not in this year's budget. But I'm not going to say that it'll never happen. If the committee feels that it's important to do that, that's something we'll have to take into consideration. But there again, it'll be another expense item that we would have to plan for if we were to do such a thing. Okay? There's some debate as to whether or not it's really needed, okay? And that's probably not a clear-cut answer, but there's some debate as to whether or not we really should do that. But that's on the table for discussion. Yes? No, we haven't. No, we have not gone to that far. I think we've kind of kicked it around internally within the committee based on our experiences with other organizations, but it really is a function of the size of the organization, the complexity of it, and we haven't I'll use this word, we haven't put it out to bid, okay? So we haven't done anything of that type. Yeah.
So one comment, one question. Thank you for doing this out in the light. And thank you for standing. I mean, you know, it's not easy to do, so thank you for doing it. The report said that, you know, no improper, you know, behavior had happened. Can you help me with the kind of where we are on, you know, we owed $95,000, they garnished $84,000. Is that coming later?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's coming with Steve's report. Okay.
I'll be more patient.
And you should have a detailed version of that at your place as well. If you don't, we'll give one to you. Another question here? Okay.
I don't know if this is for you, Jim, or for Steve, but have we tried to go back to find out why these taxes were missed in the first place?
Yes. Yeah, I guess part of this process and part of what Steve will comment on has both of which have prompted that question, okay? And I don't know that I have a straight answer for you. You know, the individual who was responsible during that period of time is deceased, okay? So it's a difficult thing to interpret why something did or did not happen, okay? And that added another level of challenge to this whole process. So I don't know that I can answer that, nor if Steve really has a good answer. Okay.
It's unknown.
Yeah, it's unknown. Well, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity. Here's one more, okay. I don't want to be here. Don't want to take all your time.
Jim, I wanted to clarify a couple things. The PowerPoint presentation you just went through, was it created by Forvis or by us?
By Forvis.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
is in fact
This
their
is their
report.
presentation, yes.
The second question is, there's a handout we were given. It's got the title Status Report. And it's written in the, so that's written by Steve
That's
Foster.
Steve's report. That's
Okay.
that's next on the agenda.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't have a date on it, so please let me know when it was published.
Okay, all right. It's been pretty recent, I'll tell you that. Like within the last 24, 48 hours. Other questions? Once again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your interest. I know this has been a lingering issue, literally for a year and a half, okay? And on behalf of the Finance Committee, I can just tell you that we have done everything we felt was appropriate as part of our fiduciary responsibility representing our congregation, both to conduct this review, but then also to continue to work to resolve the issues with the IRS. So that's a nice segue into Steve's report. And he'll comment more specifically on the other document that you have in front of you entitled Status Report. Steve?
Okay, thank you. You should have two additional reports. One summary of correspondence and contacts. That's the timeline of events taking place with the IRS and our tax attorney. Of course, she doesn't go back to 2014 with them, but this is a report from her. And the other one is the status report. And both of these were submitted to me Monday of this week by our tax attorney, okay? I started to say this has been a taxing issue, but you all know that. Oh, was that your joke? Sorry. That's good to steal a preacher's joke. Well, I've been asked to give you an update on the IRS investigation into the church's federal payroll tax problem. And I wish this was a report I didn't have to share with you, but it is what it is. And I'm almost certain that all the tax returns have been filed. Is this good? Okay. I'm almost certain that all the tax returns have been filed, but there are still a few that have not been processed. And in preparing to give you this update, I asked the tax attorney, Teresa Klink, to prepare this report for you and to share it with you and to give you a summary of how things happened and maybe you can see why they happened with the IRS. The attorney, as I said, provided a timeline of the IRS attempts to resolve the issues with our church. And that's what's so discouraging. All those various times the IRS did attempt to resolve the issues. And this report is detailed and lengthy. There are two different reports. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. So the narrative comes first. The timeline is in the back. The narrative is essentially the tax attorney's kind of summary of her work that she's been doing on our behalf. And the timeline, I think, is very helpful, that really kind of piggybacks on the Forvis report to help us know this is the detailed look at all of our dealings with the IRS, some of which were known to us and some of which were only known to our former financial assistant.
Okay, as Brent said, this is a detailed and lengthy report. And as an example, I'll begin with 2014. There's a written notice from the IRS about returns not filed in the second and third quarters of 2011. So our problems go back to 2011. That correspondence also included a deadline and the threat of a lien if payment for the first quarter of 2013 was not made. The payment was made before the deadline, catching up the first quarter of 2013, along with another late payment for the 2013 third quarter. Additionally, a payment was made for $18,740 to pay the penalties assessed due to the failure to file W-2s for 2011, file W-2s. However, the form used for paying the taxes was Form 2290, which is heavy vehicle use tax form. That's not anything you can find on the IRS website. I mean, you can find it, but you can't print it there. You have to go to another source to find that to print it. So, or go to the IRS office itself. The payment was attached to this form, resulting in the payment not getting applied as intended. So it was attached to that 2290 form, and it didn't get to the proper payment area. I'll not elaborate on what transpired after this, other than to say that the report was indicative of the manner in which our church dealt with the IRS until they appeared at our doorstep on July 1st, 2022. Though there were ongoing issues, the attorneys surmised that the IRS began in earnest to deal with the church over discrepancies between the W-2s filed for 2015 and the amounts reported on the church's 2015 941s. Those figures are different. This discrepancy was never addressed, and a large penalty was assessed. It happened again in 2016, resulting in more penalties. These problems escalated and snowballed over the next 7 years and were hidden from the church up until July the 1st of 2022. The tax attorney has much to say in her summary, if you want to take the time to read that. And she gave a general observation of the church's bookkeeping. And I quote, she said, "After review of the correspondence, it was clear that the church had not been compliant in filing all payroll tax returns when due and had not been compliant in making timely tax deposits. In some cases, payroll tax deposits were timely made, but no return was ever filed with them." So she paid them, but she didn't send the paperwork with them. In some cases, some but not all payroll tax deposits for the quarter were made. There was no pattern to what did or did not happen in any particular quarter. So that answers some of your questions. There's no pattern to it, what she did. As for penalties, they were assessed and paid. They resulted from multiple levies associated with 2015 and 2016. The church paid the duplicate penalties multiple times, but without giving the IRS clear guidance for how to apply the payments. Therefore, the IRS applied the penalty payments to the current payroll tax quarter. It was extremely difficult to uncover what had and had not been done with any precision, how to determine how to properly prepare the payroll tax returns, and then determine where the correct application should be for the payments that were made. Very confusing situations. Send in money, but don't send in the paperwork to go with it. Truthfully, it sometimes required an educated guess to determine what some payments were intended to cover. When the problems came to light, it was evident, now these aren't my words, these are the words of the tax accountant. It was evident that the church's bookkeeping was in shambles. End of quote. Now I hope you get a picture of the magnitude of the church's problems with the IRS. But to be fair, the slow response of the IRS in resolving this issue is largely on them, mostly on them. They have their own internal failures And due to understaffing and frequent changes of the assigned agents for our church, I think we're on our third agent at this time. Inherent within this system, every time someone takes over a new case, or this case, they basically have to start from the beginning of the file and get caught up. So that's a lot of work for an individual to have to do. In our church's case, there was a huge learning curve each time a new agent was assigned. Often the IRS has failed to respond to our attorney and missed meetings without giving us notices. Recently, we were once again assigned a new agent. Hopefully, this will not cause us further delays. When all is said and done, the attorney estimates that we may still owe approximately $33,000 to reconcile our tax obligations. There were some 2015 unpaid taxes recently identified that still need to be paid. Hopefully, the IRS will not assess additional penalties and interest that it might normally be due, because maybe the efforts that we've taken to correct the problems, they'll take that into consideration. Let's hope. The attorney is also hopeful that all the issues will be resolved by the end of March 2024. Now, if history is a lesson in how to avoid future problems, then we've learned a big one, haven't we? Yeah. And as Jim addressed, the Finance Committee has developed these policies and procedures, and they're being followed, and the intention is to continue following them. And I now call our position here at church, with the IRS, we have an IRS too. It's internal review system. That's what I'm calling it, internal review system. And so that's just a summary of our report. And if you have questions, I'm going to defer those to Brent. Anyone have a question? He told me I could do that. Anyone have a question?
Who has oversight over the administrative staff? So I assume that there's the administrative staff and then somebody has oversight over them. So is that process now taken care of by the Finance Committee?
So in the past, Pam Neal has been our church administrator and works in conjunction with the Finance Committee in order to make sure that our processes are in good order. And I think what we've seen here, Kenny, is as we've heard about all these, and I don't know if you've read some of the detail of that timeline, it was so difficult just to read all the things that have happened over the years, and so many things that were happening that were not, Pam was not aware of these things, and it was really happening kind of behind the scenes, where the penalties that we first became aware of in 2022, that was just the last penalty that was paid. This has been happening for a long time, payments made for penalties without the church's knowledge and no reporting. And what's really tragic, we don't really know where that money came from. We don't know how those monies were being apportioned, just coming off the top of our bottom line, sort of our savings and that kind of thing. I can't remember what word you put on it, but it has been a mess, and I think it's been a shambles, right? Our intention has been to put everything in front of you, and just as we've said from the start, we want to be as transparent as possible. That's why we're having this word tonight. But what I would say, Kenny, is we've seen kind of a sort of, let's just call it a full system failure here. There was not good internal accountability. One person had a lot of control over from receiving the mail to not having any sort of follow-up to kind of check and see if things were actually happening as reported, and we now know they weren't. So it's very disturbing, and just one additional word I would say is that if you look at the top line on what happened in 2014, there was a penalty that was paid from 2011, and our former administrator was not the administrator back in 2011. So a penalty was paid without our knowledge, which what makes it strange is you could never say that it was our former administrator's fault. It happened before she got on the scene. But it demonstrates this pattern of things that just do not make sense in a lot of ways. They just don't make sense. And we wish we had the benefit of being able to talk to that person, as to what exactly happened, but we do not. So let's just kind of open it up and just kind of see other questions. Let's get the microphone around. You can ask anything you want to. You can comment on anything you want to. So anyone want to just raise your hand? Yep, we got one here right in the middle. Okay.
I guess I would ask the question, the external audit, if there had been one over the years, I would assume it would have caught this. So the cost of an external audit, is it more than what we're paying now as a church for what's happened?
Your
That was a quick answer.
Your point is well taken. Yeah.
That's a very quick answer.
Yeah. Well, and an audit, even if thought to be unnecessary, still has the benefit of we are all working together. People are watching the whole process. It has that deterrent effect. So I do think it's something we need to strongly consider for the future.
Do we have a total of the penalties we've paid? Total amount?
Well, the best I think we can say at this point, you can look at that little timeline that does say what has been assessed over the years and what has been paid without our knowledge over the years. What really, the thing that got our biggest attention was when the IRS showed up was that a massive penalty of $84,000 had been paid around, I think it was in January of that year, without the knowledge of the church, and that there had been missions dollars used to pay that penalty. So it was garnished is what happened. Essentially, Truist, the levy was applied and they sent the money in, and then our former assistant corrected it essentially with those accounts.
We've been subbing out some of our accounting, and now we're talking about bringing that back in-house.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what the cost difference is between doing that in-house and leaving it farmed out?
Yeah. So it is pretty significant. We have been paying a pretty large amount for outsourcing at this point of $5,000 a month is what it's costing us to do the full outsourcing, payables as well as payroll. So part of the challenge has been, as we've done that outsourcing, it just hasn't worked very well. Am I speaking correctly here? It's just been very challenging with our current outsourcing. We think we can do better. And especially in terms of how much we're paying for that, we feel like there's a better option out there. And then when it comes to contribution records, that's been one of the biggest challenges is, are we having good information? If you were to call and say, hey, can you tell me how much I've given to the church in 2023? And our capacity to be able to answer that question and say, oh yeah, here it is right here. It's been very challenging with our outsourcing to be able to work with the contributions. So help me if I'm wrong here, but the idea now is to actually do like contribution recording and all the sort of internal information to bring that back in-house while we're still going to outsource payroll. And it could be that we do just a cheaper, more efficient system for payroll. So maybe a hybrid at least going forward. And I do think I would agree with the assessment. The Finance Committee has implemented the processes that they said they were going to do. We have much better controls now. And that does give me confidence that we can do more internally and that we can feel good about that. But at the same time, we do not want to go back to where we've been before. And so we would make that decision very carefully as to what the next steps are. Does that answer your question? Well, tell me, yeah. Yeah, so we're currently, right now, we're paying our financial assistant is $30, 28 hours at $30 an hour is what we're doing. So much less than what we were paying our former financial assistant, but then you balance that with the outsourcing that we're paying for.
And
So-
he's also part-time, which
He
is
is
no
part-time for now.
benefits.
Yes. Yeah.
Some have wanting to know, because the thing says, asked me, Bill Coley asked me, and they want to know the name of the attorney. It's Teresa Klink.
Teresa
Is who
Klink
that
is her
what?
name, yes.
It says, Bill Coley asked me, that's Teresa Klink. She's a tax attorney. Highly recommended to us.
Okay. So we got one more back here.
I'm sorry.
Him. Yep.
I heard or read recently that there's going to be a recommendation to hire a new staff person.
Uh-huh.
And my question is there a connection between what we're talking about tonight and hiring a new staff person?
We have restyled the position of church administrator to be more of what we're calling executive pastor. And yes, we are bringing a recommendation this weekend for the hiring of someone new. If Pam was doing church administration before, Steve has been our interim administrator since June 1st, which is about 3 months beyond the 3-month commitment we asked him for, maybe a little more. And so this person that we are recommending, it's Josh Gibson is who we're recommending. You may as well know. I've sent out the email, and there'll be Josh will be meeting tomorrow night with church council and then the deacon body afterwards. And so that role will have administration within his job description. And we feel very confident based on the fact of his previous church administration and also that he has an MBA, that he has worked with payroll in his current position and other financial functions. We feel confident that he's gonna do a good job with this. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
Here we go. Wait, here I come. Here I come. Here I come. Sorry, sir.
So, no wrongdoing, but I was kind of trying to read through the report. Have all the funds been accounted for? I know we're still sorting out some of the tax issues with the IRS, but $95,000 owed, 85 garnished. Kind of where are we on that? Or do we know?
That is the big question, Wade.
Okay.
And I wish I had a better answer to say that we have clarity as to exactly where the funds have gone. The best we can say through the Forvis accounting is that there's no evidence of theft, kind of wrongdoing in that regard. But as you can see in the report, there was a lot that was going on, kind of in and out. And so I think that one thing I'm really proud of for our finance committee is they've done a great job now of reconciling just how much we have in the bank with all our different accounts, and every month making sure that things are adding up in terms of where our dollars are, and then trying to also discern where do our designated accounts kind of fall into all this. And so having moved through the Forvis process and also establishing new parameters and being faithful to those, my hope is that as we start the new year, we are turning the corner and saying, until further knowledge, this is what we have in the bank, this is how we're moving forward. And of course, if we get any new information down the road, we'll come forward to the church and say, let's talk about it, you know? But my hope is that, you know, with 4 of us, we're wrapping up this investigation. We've set new processes in place. We're working to reconcile with the IRS. We're on their time frame right now. So again, my hope is that as we get into 2024, we are moving forward a church better and saying, you know, God, help us. And recognizing that we've failed here. You know, we need to just own that up, right? And say, let's move forward and get better.
Thanks.
Okay.
I think Andy had a question.
Yep. My question is, I've looked through the new financial policies and procedures. So I'm just curious, where's the redundancy going to be in the bookkeeping position? In other words, Beverly was basically autonomous. She did her own thing, and nobody really knew exactly what she was doing. there should be at least like 2 or 3 people that can slide in and do that. And I know obviously the executive pastor is going to be one of those people
Right.
that this person works under, but is there going to be a second person that is aware of how everything gets done and could step in today because this person's out tomorrow, that type of thing?
Yes, yeah. I know that's been discussed with the Finance Committee. So it was important in the interviewing of Josh Gibson to make sure that he was capable of understanding the system, to be able to interpret it and also see if there's irregularities, you know, sort of a cross-check so that he has that ability to do that. So that's one layer. Additionally, the Finance Committee has much more now oversight, looking at much more information than they were a year ago. They are moving through all the different, you know, payables and things and making sure that the bank statement is reconciled. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that, you know, Beth Brazil, you've been helping out this year to know some of the processes. Am I right about that? Kind of getting ready. And I think the idea is to have one additional person who is trained on the system, so that we do have that possibility, you know, covered. Just another layer of accountability. Okay, let's get the microphone over to you.
Has the staff found ways to come up with economizing enough that we can make up these large deficits? I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, I do commend our staff that we recognize, because giving has been down, generally our expenses relative to any kind of programming, anything that we sort of have a degree of control over, we have kept those down under budget, you know, and additionally, I think our overall personnel footprint is also down for the year, so we're not paying that full budget. There's some things, as we mentioned earlier about our facilities, some things just come due, you know, and we're doing our best that we can to cover those things. So yeah, we're mindful, Judy. And I recognize that as we head into the new budget cycle, that we want to be, you know, looking at how can we cut expenses? What can we do to reduce? You know, like Bob said, he didn't want to jinx it, but Bob, I don't believe in jinxes. All right, I believe in prayer, and I'm praying that God's going to help us to move forward. You know, last year we prayed that God would help us to get to the end of our budget cycle in very good shape, and we made it. We did it. So we had just a very small deficit on par to what it could have been. We had surpluses in years before. So I'm not under any illusions we can do that again, but I am praying and asking people to be generous, you know, and that's a tall ask given what we're describing tonight, you know, because we want people to feel good about their giving and that we are stewarding that in a healthy way. Okay?
Did I understand that the 85,000, whatever that was garnished, was from designated funds? Is our church incorporated?
Is our church incorporated?
Is the church as an entity a corporation? Do we know?
No. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'm certainly not, but it would seem to me that the entity of the church should be a corporation and that those accounts should be titled in such a way that they are not part of that corporation. Therefore, those funds could not be. I mean, those are protected funds. The accounts should not be titled the same as the general church operating funds. I don't believe.
They are in a designated account. They are.
But they're not. But
the problem was the one who had a lot of control over those funds was able to leverage them. And no matter what the intention of our church might be for those things.
But that's why the 85,000 was basically, you said without the church's knowledge.
Yes.
But they went through every transaction since 2012.
Okay. Yeah.
How does $85,000 go out and it not?
Yeah. Right.
Is that the $1 million question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would go back to, you know, just the oversight. You know, there was not a sense of accountability within the whole system that would have said, what's going on here? So, we're not. Okay, we got one more down here. Yep.
Okay, I just want to understand the structure, because speaking of corporations, the structure that's going to be henceforth, so from this point forward. A committee is only as good as the people who are sitting on it, and it's only as diligent as the knowledge level of the people sitting on it. So right now we have a great finance committee. Last year we had an amazing finance committee as well. 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line, if the finance committee is in charge of the top level of oversight, that can change depending on who's on that committee. So is this executive pastor going to be at the top level, the one who's administering and making sure that everything's happening as it should, and coming to the finance committee for approval of things? Or is it the finance committee that's still going to be over everything, and then the executive pastor is underneath that?
No, I do think it's a hybrid of what you suggested, to where the executive pastor is going to be charged with, this is the system that is expected to be followed, and we are counting on that person to make sure that it is followed. But that is also in the context of the finance committee is also taking their responsibility to heart every single time they meet, to look at the transactions, to do what they've agreed to do. So it's not just on the staff person alone, but it is again a full system that needs to be working together for this. Good question. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna no, Richard's gonna kill me like with the choir. So I'm going to go ahead and just say, if it's okay, I mean, unless you just have a burning question, I'm going to be here afterwards to answer questions, and we can talk as long as you want to. But I do want to say thank you to Steve. Steve has been amazing, helping us to just sort through and continue to move forward. Yeah. And I want to thank Jim Decker for his work, just a really steady hand right now, and way to go presenting the 4 of us material too. That was good. Yeah. So, Brandon, I'm going to call you back up, wherever Brandon is. There we go. Yeah. And I've got a couple of final remarks, if you don't mind. Yeah.
So now we have staff reports. We'll not do okay. Is there old business? Is there new business? Anything? Brent, do you have some final words? Okay.
So I'm really grateful for just the patience of our church. I'm grateful for the leaders of our church that have done really well through this whole process. It has not been easy. It's been very stressful, but I'm very, very thankful for all those that have helped to get us where we are today. And you know, even though I say we're turning a page, I have no illusions that this is the end of this. You know, we're going to keep working on this, and we need the whole church empowered to hold also to the accountability that we've said that we would set, so that we can make sure that this never happens again. I am thankful for God's goodness to us through this whole process. God's kept us together and unified. It hadn't been the best of times, but we're doing well, and so just want to commend our church for the way that we've moved through this in a very healthy way. On the table tonight, I see a couple people looking at this document right here. So this is probably the first time most of y'all are seeing this, but what I wanted y'all to see tonight was the way that we try to have communication with the guests that come through our church doors. We have a lot of guests every single Sunday in both services, mostly in the 11 o'clock service though. So what this list represents is those persons that have filled out a card voluntarily, that little connect card, or we have added them because we knew they were connecting to some kind of ministry. Helps us to know sort of how to help them take a next step. And what the highlighted names are all the people that have joined First Baptist in 2023. It is a lot of people, and there's more to come. I know people that are waiting to join, who see the good in our church. As I say on frequent Sundays, we are not a perfect church, right? We've got a long way to go. But God is doing a good work among us. And if we can continue just to hold fast and stick together and keep praying for one another and get better a little bit each week, I believe there's a great future for our church. Not because of anything we do, but because of what God's doing through us. So wanted y'all to see that just as an encouragement to you. And just grateful for what you mean to me and to all of our staff too. So Brandon, I think we're ready to wrap up. So you want to pray for us, maybe? Oh yeah. Susan has given us some of the Another good thing that's happening is we're continuing to move forward with our renovation, which is on a very good pace right now. I think we got a couple of pictures there, Seth, perhaps of some of the renovation that's happening at the moment. Did you get those up there at the end? No. Okay, never mind. So Susan has got over here, Susan Tatum, some of the fabrics that have been chosen, some of the finishes. Right now, the architects say that around the 1st of March, we're going to have most of the work done. So we got about 3 months to go, 2.5 to 3 for most of the work, but still there'll be the punch list and some other things to happen. But we are on track for that, and really grateful for that. I'll show you some more pictures on a Sunday, maybe when we get back in January. Okay? All right. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions or concerns or anything anybody want to talk about? Okay, let's pray really quick. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this time that we can be together. Thank you for this group of people who all care about your church and about your kingdom here on earth. God, I pray that you just help us to continue to move forward as we deal with all of these difficult things, and that we can just stay united and move forward. Please watch over each of us this evening. Keep us safe as we travel home. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Meeting is adjourned. Have a good night.